This week on Writers, Inc.
I think that's kind of an overcorrection has happened where, queer characters always used to be the villains. They were always evil. And now queer characters in so many stories are just so boring and they have no real flaws. They don't do bad things. And I just want to show that we're just people. Sometimes we do really bad things. And it was also important to me, too, to show a character who makes mistakes and has all these regrets, but finds ways to move on, because we're also in a society right now where people are just defined by their mistakes and can't get away from them because of the internet.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie in a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
It's Jenna Brown.
Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So last week I beat up on Grammarly pretty bad, and I got some emails from people. And apparently I should have clicked on the little link that came up, the pop-up window from Grammarly, because if you click through, they install something on your computer that basically allows Grammarly to work in whatever program you're in. So it's actually way better. So instead of like right now in Scrivener, now I've installed this thing. So instead of having to copy and paste from Scrivener into Grammarly to do any type of grammar check, it actually does it real time in Scrivener. And it works like pretty much anywhere where I type. Like if I open Word, if I open a chat window, whatever, it's basically right there correcting every single mistake that I make. So I apologize to the folks over at Grammarly. This is way better. I am very happy with it. And I never realized I made so many real-time grammar mistakes. Thanks for putting it in my face.
How often do you get a real life happily ever after? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It never happens. Yeah.
I use Pro Writing Aid, and they have that add-in, and you can just go through and applies it, but it's not real time like that. So I might have to check out the Grammarly. That's cool.
Yeah, I might have to check that out.
It's a catch-22 because it, like having those things thrown in my face as I'm typing kind of takes me out of whatever I'm writing. So I sort of kind of like just writing it and then fixing it. But I'm working with it because I mean, this is definitely faster and it's more efficient if I can get used to it.
Does it still pop up and like yell at you for using language that might offend people or whatever? Because that's one of the reasons I stopped using it.
It hasn't with this one. I mean, I've honestly found that like Grammarly's got a free version and they've got their paid version. I think there's multiple tiers and stuff. And the paid version tends to point out a lot more stuff than I wanted to. Like I kind of like the results that I get from the free one because it just gives me the bare bones. You should have a comma here. This word is spelled wrong. This double word is, shouldn't be there. Like it gives me that kind of stuff. But I don't really like it commenting on sentence structure and things like that because with sentence structure, it flags like everything dialogue related because people don't speak in complete sentences. And, like if your dialogue is accurate, then you're going to have errors, but Grammarly doesn't seem to catch that. And most of them don't, at this point. You think at some point they'll come up with a way to catch, stuff between the quotes needs to be a little bit more lenient. But right now they don't seem to do that.
It does yell at you when you curse though.
Well, even when you're writing, like just depending on like the voice of the narrative, like sometimes I've had where like even Pro Writing Aid is almost useless because, like I'm deliberately writing sentences a certain way and it's just like that's wrong and it's like, well, it's not. I mean, I know it's not your preference, but it's fine.
I'll try writing it as historical fiction or like something that's taking place the 1800s or whatever. Like it's totally different and the grammar software is correcting for today's language, so you've got to ignore even more of it.
Right.
Alrighty, Kevin, what is in the news?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, JD. That gives me an excuse to scroll down. Okay, here we are. House passes bill that could lead a TikTok ban in broad bipartisan vote. The U.S. House passed legislation potentially banning TikTok if ByteDance, its parent company, doesn't divest its stake, reflecting broad bipartisan support with a vote of 352 in favor and 65 opposed. The legislation titled Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act advances to the Senate, with President Biden indicating readiness to sign it into law, mandating a sale of TikTok within 6 months or facing a ban. The bill addresses concerns over potential Chinese government access to American TikTok users' data, given Chinese national security laws that could compel ByteDance to cooperate with intelligence efforts. Despite widespread legislative support, the bill faces potential hurdles in the Senate amid concerns about focusing on a single company and First Amendment implications. Previous efforts to regulate or ban TikTok have encountered legal challenges and mixed public opinion. The bill's proponents argue it targets conduct rather than content, aiming to mitigate national security risks without infringing on American companies or limiting free speech.
This was interesting because this is, very bipartisan. Like you're seeing literally everybody voting yes on this thing, and it basically started after a classified briefing. This committee basically had their vote, and then they revealed their classified findings to the rest of Congress, and they are moving very fast. So I'm really curious what's actually in that classified briefing, and I'm wondering if that's going to get released at some point. It's hard to say how this is going to play out because there's I think I saw two more players this morning that jumped in and said, "Hey, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. I'll buy it." It's getting valued for over $200 billion. So it's not, what did Twitter sell for? Wasn't that like 50 or 60 billion? So this
for like 40 billion.
Yeah. So this is kind of a big price tag. But from what ByteDance said yesterday, it sounds like they're not willing to sell. So they may let this ticking clock expire and then no more TikTok.
Well, what's really frightening is that the whole reason people are willing to pay $200 billion for it is the same reason that the government wants to pull China out of it. Because of the data and the way to manipulate people.
Well, we want Americans to manipulate Americans, right? We don't want foreign governments to manipulate us. It's got to be another American.
Manipulated in America is the new slogan you see on everything.
I like it. I'm just happy that there's something that's bringing the government together, I mean,
it's nice to see them getting along, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like, I'm just pleased to see it.
I'm curious if we're going to see this go further though, like away from TikTok, because, I've got devices all over my house that were made in China, security cameras, power outlets, a million, all of us do. And a lot, there's Chinese chips in there. Who knows what type of data is being collected there. And like the same argument that's being made for TikTok could be made with those types of devices. So, depending on what comes out of that classified briefing, this may expand into something else. But it is interesting to see something like this move as quickly as it is through the government.
Dutch nonfiction publisher Maven has created AI books that allow readers to interact with the text through messaging, introducing a novel conversational format alongside traditional editions. The AI book engages readers by answering questions related to the book's content in specific contexts, enhancing the reading experience by applying the book's themes to personalized scenarios. Authors and publishers play a crucial role in the development of these AI books with a thorough testing and feedback process to ensure satisfaction before finalizing the project. Maven's AI books operate with a proxy architecture to safeguard the manuscript's text and users' privacy, ensuring no data is shared with external parties like OpenAI. The AI books, described as ebooks on steroids, are priced at €9.99 or $12.79 US, with current sales reaching around 1,500 copies. Maven is exploring retail partnerships for broader distribution. This is an interesting story, actually, and it does. This is something I think that does play nice with AI. Rather than AI being a big scary, this is one of those use cases that I've kind of advocated for, which is like, don't use AI to create, use it to augment.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's a choose your own adventure, right? That's kind of what it's coming down to.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, I'd be interested in trying it just to see what it's like. But like I read to relax, and I think I like the fact that it's a one-sided deal. It's you're just reading, you're not interacting. I feel like it's going to take a lot of the relaxation out of reading if you're actually answering questions and driving the story. But I can see where this could be fun, and I could see this evolving into something bigger.
Didn't we just talk about something like this about, like customizing a book experience? So that's kind of eerie that it's now coming. I don't know how I feel about it. I like that it's allegedly sequestered from like feeding the giant AI machine that's eventually going to be our downfall. But I don't know. That feels kind of creepy. Have a book talk to you and like answer your questions. I don't know if I like it.
I could see this being useful for kids, right? For little kids, having like an interactive story.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the what was the book? There was a book that involved a concept like this. Now I can't remember what it was. Man.
There's toys coming out. There's a doll called Moxie, which uses AI, and it's fairly interactive, where your child can talk to it. So I'm guessing like these kind of things may come out there first. Like this seems like the sort of thing that would come out, for children.
I think it's interesting that the authors and the publishers develop and test it. So I wonder what like the hours of testing goes into to make sure that this works on the user end. So I find that kind of interesting.
All right, next up, libraries struggle to afford the demand for ebooks and seek new state laws and fight with publishers. Libraries face soaring ebook and audiobook costs, with digital files often priced significantly higher for libraries than for consumers. For instance, a hard copy might cost a library $18, while leasing a digital copy could cost $55, and these digital licenses expire after a set period or a number of checkouts. The financial strain is pronounced for smaller libraries such as West Haven Library, which spent over $12,000 in 3 years on just 276 digital titles, with 84 of those no longer available due to the expiration of licenses. Publishers defend their pricing model by arguing that library ebook licenses allow multiple patrons to borrow books, thereby reducing the per reader cost. They also express concerns that proposed legislative changes to make e-material more affordable could harm the publishing ecosystem and undermine authors' rights. Legislation proposed in several states aims to address the affordability gap for libraries by regulating the terms of contracts between libraries and publishers. However, the publishing industry strongly opposes these efforts, arguing they violate federal copyright law. The demand for digital content for libraries continues to rise, with libraries and patrons alike facing long waiting lists for popular titles. Legislative efforts seek to provide relief, but face legal challenges and opposition from the publishing industry. This was, by the way, Draft to Digital had a whole pricing model for that ended up becoming pretty popular for libraries, where they just sort of pay as they go. So instead of buying the book at a inflated price, there's a sort of per use price, and they can put out as many different issues or copies as they need to.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where we're missing some of the stats, because I'm guessing that over time, the ebook, like our libraries are lending a lot more ebooks than they used to, and print copy demand might actually be down because of that. And this might be publishers trying to adjust, for that loss in income. There's probably some, a lot more to this than what we're able to see. The only other argument I've ever heard on this is, like an ebook could be checked out over and over and over again, far more often than a paper copy can, because even the paper copies, even though multiple people can borrow them, they have to be replenished. They fall apart, especially, they get worn out. They have to buy new ones. The ebook is just over and over again, and they try to adjust that into the price. But I'm guessing there's a lot more at play here than what they're telling us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm a little shocked that it's so much higher. I mean, I understand like the perpetuity of an ebook, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is for that.
That's the whole argument, is that, okay, as the publisher, if one of my books is in your library system and somebody's checking it out, and 1,000 people check it out, you've only paid the $6 cover price or whatever, like, I'm basically losing money. That's the thought, right? And the raising it to like $55 a copy was the way they would compensate for that. But the problem really here is that that they're licensing it, and that license ends after a set amount of time. So the libraries are having to, if it's a really popular book, the libraries end up spending a lot of money on that book. So I think a more perpetual system of like that sort of one click thing, like, as soon as there's a demand for that book, the library pays a much smaller rate, maybe only a few pennies on the dollar, but that's perpetual. There's no end to that license. I think that would solve the whole problem, and that model does exist in the library system. So it wouldn't be much to make that the sort of de facto standard.
Yeah, it just feels weird to punish libraries in a way. I mean, I understand publishers need to make their money, but also I don't know. I feel like there's so many intangibles when it comes to business that large corporations tend to forget, like if someone really loves a book, they might check out the ebook at the library, but odds are I don't know many people who, if they absolutely love it, won't end up going out and buying, their own copy of the book. So I don't know.
Yeah. And it's a tough one. I see what you're saying. Like they should only have to pay for what people use. I think there's probably information we're missing on both ends, right? So things get lost in the middle. And the library has their perspective, and publishers and authors have their perspective, and
Yeah.
Kevin is going to go solve it all for them by working as the mediator.
I am.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Excellent.
And I ask only 10% of each sale.
Perfect. That's going to help them save money.
This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
JD, who's up this week?
This week we've got Maggie Thrash on. Maggie debuted in 2015 with her acclaimed young adult graphic novel Honor Girl. She's set to launch her first adult title. It's called Rainbow Black and releases March 19th. So here she is, Maggie Thrash.
All right. So Maggie Thrash, your newest novel, Rainbow Black, is part murder mystery, part gay international fugitive love story, and part meditation on queerness and identity. How did you navigate integrating these aspects, and what inspired you to explore queer stories within this genre backdrop?
That's a really good question. I mean, so the book takes place during the Satanic Panic in the late 80s in America. And that subject is so rich thematically, especially for a queer person. I really wanted my protagonist to be queer. I think that something that's not super popular to talk about is the closeted experience of being queer, and how a queer protagonist, how like queerness for so many decades was synonymous with having secrets, with having a secret identity, with having a secret past, with trying to do a lot of image management in a way that a criminal, often has to do. So I've always just been really interested in the parallel between queer life and the sort of criminal life. And and I'm not scared. I think a lot of people are kind of scared to make those comparisons because people are over it. They're like, we shouldn't, the closeted experience isn't the fullness of the queer experience, but it's still a part of the experience that really fascinates me and that really defined me as a queer person. So it's probably going to be part of most of my writing.
Yeah.
I hope that sort of answered your question.
No, it really does. And the whole concept of that closeted queerness, and also the fear of that time period with the Satanic Panic. I mean, there were so many parallels when reading this book. And I'm just curious, how did you feel those historical context shaped and influenced that representation of queer identity? And what sort of challenges did that pose for you as the storyteller?
Well, it's interesting. growing up, so I'm a millennial. The character Lacey is more Gen X. So it's interesting for me to write about a character who's slightly older than me, because as a millennial, I never heard about the Satanic Panic. I remember the first time I heard about it, I was maybe in 10th grade. It was the year 2000. And me and my nerd friends were trying to start a Dungeons and Dragons club at my school. And the librarian told us we weren't allowed to, because Dungeons and Dragons had turned children into Satanists and made them murder each other. And I was like, wait, what? Because she was still hanging on to this panic that society by and large was over. And it's like, I feel like there's nothing more irrelevant or forgotten than something that happened 8 to 10 years ago. That's the most like buried, bit of pop culture there is. So, I remember just finding it really fascinating once I learned more about it, that like this whole hysteria had happened 8 years ago and then been completely forgotten. And there's so much that's so fascinating to me as a metaphor for both just like how we treat human beings. We focus on them while they're in the spotlight, and then we throw them away as soon as we're bored, but also for, queerness, how, especially I know so many gay people where it's like whatever happened 8 years ago, it's like, that's not me. That's not me. That person is gone. The new me is here. I'm queer, and just forget that person I used to be. So, I just think there's so much there between like Americans' Puritanism and the kind of negotiating being queer within that kind of society.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you touched on the person who was so afraid of the Satanic Panic, but yet the media had such an impact on them several years ago that it was something that was ingrained in them as a fear. And I think that, as another queer person, there are people that are, a couple decades older than us that have these preconceived notions about our lifestyle and all of these things. And you're just like, well, that's not true. It wasn't true when it happened. And when it was on the news, it wasn't like that. But
exactly. It's like they became like imprinted by this moment.
Exactly.
And it's happening right now with like, I don't know if you remember the hysteria around just a couple of years ago, the litter box kid, like supposedly, like parents were in this uproar that there was a child identifying as a cat and using a litter box. And it was this obvious fear of, gender fluidity. And this litter box child did not exist. It was just kind of an urban legend that dominated PTA meetings for a couple of years. And it's just, and now everyone's sort of forgotten about it. And so this cycle, happens over and over. And it's so often about a fear of queerness. Like it's so it's just interesting that at the heart of all of these panics, it's like it's a queer fear.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, the sad truth about the litter box being that for most cases, it was whenever going through those shooter drills or whenever actually having that situation, how would you allow kids to use the restroom when they're locked in a room that has no facility? It was litter.
Wait, is that part of the origin of that urban legend? I didn't even know that.
From what I understand, and with what research I have done, yes.
Oh my gosh. And with these things, the layers until you get to the true origin of it's just always like you have to be a cultural detective.
Yeah, exactly. And so as ultimately a cultural detective from the 80s with the Satanic Panic, how did you take this concept and put this fear of Lacey's parents, who ultimately there's a situation that's involved with them and it becomes this sort of courtroom drama at one point or another, but how do you take this historical accuracy and craft it into this fictional narrative? How do you do that to really craft the story as you go along?
Yeah, I mean, I read court documents from the McMartin trial. That with the McMartin trial is the most famous trial that occurred during the Satanic Panic, where these preschool teachers, these old ladies, were accused of hundreds of counts of pedophilia and satanic ritual abuse that never happened. And the court case, it went on for years. It cost millions of dollars. And, there's a HBO film about it, the indictment. You can read the court documents. And it was really important to me to kind of give an accurate, to show, and also I'm the child of two lawyers, so I'm extremely interested in courtroom procedures, like the drama of it, the back and forth. I find it just, legal thrillers are one of the greatest genres of all time. So I didn't want to shy away from portraying the trial and really showing the reader, like, this is what it was like in the courtroom during this insane time in American history, where people genuinely believed that preschool teachers were satanic pedophiles. And real life it had real life consequences for these people.
Yeah. And that part, I mean, the entire narrative was fantastic, but that part with the courtroom drama and really seeing Lacey, who is a young kid for most of this courtroom drama that's happening, and seeing how her words get twisted against her so much, and how people she trusts just basically screw her over. But I'm so curious, when we talk about like the family accusations, these traumatic events that happened to poor Lacey, and just all these things that shape her life, how did you incorporate any sort of like personal experiences, or how did you inform yourself on this character, Lacey?
Lacey as a character has been with me for a long time, because a weird fact about this book is that I actually started writing it 14 years ago. I started writing it in like 2008, I think. And so the character has grown up with me as I've grown up. And, I'm not Lacey. It is fictional. And I do feel like it's important to say that.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like, it's fiction. There's an assumption people have that, the main character is really it's just me. It's just the author. But it's like fiction has a real valuable place. Not everything is real. So it's not me, but I think because this character's been with me for 14 years, she does have a lot of complexity, because she's been in my head for so long, and I put her in the book through so much. And it was really important to me that no matter what crazy things she went through, that her emotions and her responses always felt really, really real. And my editor really helped me with that as well.
Yeah. And I enjoyed that you kind of kept us with Lacey for several years, because there aren't many novels that I know of that like expand so long with these sorts of topics. So it was really interesting. And speaking of, you have a graphic novel called Honor Girl. You have some web comics, The Cure for Desire and Loner Comics. I'm curious how writing in those sorts of mediums and that style alters your creative process. Have you found these new opportunities when you write prose after intermixing that visual and text?
So I think that writing Honor Girl was something I needed to do as a person to learn how to become vulnerable, which I was unwilling to do before. And I basically learned through comics how to be emotionally vulnerable. And then I applied that to prose. My writing, a lot of times I kind of protect myself by writing very sarcastically. I love doing satire. I love like barbed characters. But Lacey required vulnerability. The book wouldn't have worked without it. And I gained that vulnerability through writing Honor Girl and through learning visual storytelling.
Yeah, I really like that concept of having that vulnerability towards her. Is that something that like you would like to see come out of Rainbow Black as like a conversation about like this opening up and this vulnerability for queer people to kind of talk more, or what kind of thing are you hoping people get from Rainbow Black?
Absolutely. I mean, I would really love that. I would really love for queer people to be taken off the pedestal, because I think that's kind of an overcorrection has happened where, queer characters always used to be the villains, they were always evil, and now queer characters in so many stories are just so boring and they have no real flaws, they don't do bad things, and I just want to show that we're just people. Sometimes we do really bad things, and it was also important to me too to show a character who makes mistakes and has all these regrets but finds ways to move on, because we're also in a society right now where people are just defined by their mistakes and can't get away from them because of the internet. And I would just love for readers of Rainbow Black to see, like, you can do something awful, you can have awful things happen to you, and you can still move past it, and you don't have to let it define you forever. Identity is mutable. People do. I mean, I don't want to say people change, because I guess the question I want to ask in the book is, do people change? And I want to leave that to the reader to answer. I don't want to tell the reader what to think. But I guess to sum up, that would be the main thing I want the reader to come away with, is asking the question, do people change? Have I changed? Am I the same person I was when I was 14? Are any of us?
Right. And this question might be still too close to readers, but from the writer perspective, we have queer narratives, and they challenge conventional social norms or societal norms and perspectives. And I'm just curious, what do you think the role of queer storytelling from queer storytellers helps in reshaping those societal perceptions of identity in relationships?
Only queer people know what it's like to be queer. And I think that, which isn't to say that straight people cannot write queer characters, they can, because there's certain parts of a queer experience that everyone can relate to. Everyone can relate to alienation. Everyone can relate to secrets. Everyone can relate to love. Everyone can relate to, the kind of like weird magic of attraction and the feeling that attraction creates, where like, oh, I didn't know myself because I didn't expect to be attracted to this person, whether they're same sex or not. Everyone can relate to that. But, I can always tell. I feel like I can always tell when a character is written by a straight person. I can always tell. And I don't say that with any, bitterness or malice, but and in a way I say it happily, because it reinforces to me that, like, no, queer stories are important because we do it. It's important when we do it, because you can tell when we're doing it. We're not disposable. Queer people aren't disposable. Straight people can't just write our stories. So, we're all vulnerable. I really never want to make like a us versus them situation.
Oh, no,
I never want to do
Yeah.
that. But just to any queer writer out there, no one can do what you do. Don't feel that just because queer stories are becoming more mainstream that anyone can do it. Like, we need you as a queer author, listener, to step up and keep writing.
Yeah, exactly. I think some type of adage of like the representation across the board is fantastic to see. The true stories are really the heart of it, though. And so to see more of that, to inspire more of that, is fantastic. And that's why I love how you bring this queer storytelling into this genre, because to me, reading it, I just didn't feel like I had seen much of that sort of queer storytelling in like this thriller-esque courtroom drama as a highlight. And so it was really fun to explore that.
I do want to say that, like, I just remembered, like, Call Me by Your Name is this exception, because it's like, that was written by a straight man, but it's like, he did get it. So it's like, I don't want to say all straight people can't get it, because occasionally it's like, oh, he really got it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I and it was important to me. So many great queer stories are love stories. And I do think Rainbow Black is a love story. but I also really wanted to make it a thriller. Like, this is a thriller about a queer person. I do, yeah, the genre aspect of it was really important to me.
Definitely. So looking ahead, can you share any themes or ideas that you're exploring with future projects?
It's really funny. It's just more of the same. It's more secrets. It's more double identities. It's more murder. It's just like, I can't get away from these things. I really am quite obsessed with characters who do things that are really, really wrong, but they're not villains. There are two paths, and one is a virtuous path and one is the non-virtuous path, and they take the non-virtuous path. And I'm just obsessed, and then it haunts them. I'm obsessed with characters who are haunted by their past. That will just always be part of my work, I think. I can't get away from it. I'm haunted by being haunted by the past.
That's funny. Okay, so as a final question for aspiring authors, potentially those that are interested in queer storytelling, but you can keep this as broad as you would like, what advice might you have for them?
Be honest. I think just be honest. And I think that's part of my obsession with characters who make these non-virtuous decisions, because I really want to create a safe space in literature for people to say their real thoughts, even their bad thoughts, because that is what makes people interesting. And and part of what makes us interesting as queer people is bringing honesty to that experience and sharing it. And just be brutally honest. If you have a feeling, if you're trying to describe a feeling that feels too complicated or too scary, I know it's easy to think the answer is to simplify it. Don't. Lean into how complicated it is, lean into how dark it is, and just don't sugarcoat it. Be honest about your experience and about the experience your characters are going through.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for those really interesting questions. Those were really thought-provoking.
Good. I'm glad.
So who were you 8 to 10 years ago, and have you forgot what it's like to be that person?
No.
I think as you get older, it's like,
I'm very different.
Are you? Than 10 years ago?
I'm a completely different person than I was 8 years ago. Yeah. Because
Really?
let's see, 8 years ago, I wasn't yet working at Draft Digital. That whole experience did change a lot about the way I think and the way I operate, even as an author. All the experiences I've had since then, getting on the road full time, all that's definitely changed me. In fact, my wife comments on that. Our family comment on that all the time. That, there was a kind of, you can see it in photos, like that I just had a completely different personality back then. More confidence now.
Do you all like main characters in your book, do you tend to follow your current age? Like when you start a new book and you throw your main character in there?
No.
Like I've seen that with a lot of authors that I read. Like if you read Stephen King, you'll notice that his characters are aging with him, and that seems to happen, with a lot of authors. I think it's very rare for people to actually write older characters, at least as a main character. As a one-off or a B character, that's different. But I think mainly because we don't have that experience yet. We haven't been that older person, so none of us actually go there while we're writing the books. It's a lot easier to pull on, what's actually happened to us. So you can write a child, you can write a teenager, because we've all been there, done that. But writing somebody older is totally different.
My characters are perpetually 35, just like me. Like they just live in that zone, because I feel like that's a good age for most protagonists, because you're still sort of vital, but you're old enough to have a little bit of wisdom. Like you're not a boneheaded 20 something, but you're not crotchety like Indiana Jones in the last movie.
Mine vary between like early 20s to late 30s. I don't know. And I couldn't tell you why, other than just what the age fits for the character and their backstory. I don't write a lot of I don't know that I am confident enough to capture the actual like angst of adolescence anymore. I mean, I kind of remember it, but I don't know that. I don't know if I want to like kind of spend the time in that mental headspace. And I don't know that I could do middle grade either, but I like playing around with different adults. Although now you have me thinking like maybe I should write something with a little old granny as a main character.
I think it's hard to get dialogue right, especially for teenagers because it evolves so quickly. So like teenagers in my head are teenagers when I was a teenager. So like that's the dialogue that's caught in my head. That being said, that was the '80s. It's very different from what's happening in today's world. Unless you have children, if you have children, you can play off of that.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to talk to my wife and have 5 or 6 more, so I've got different age brackets that I can pull from. Because I've got no.
It's good for your career.
Yeah, strictly for the writing. I mean, right now I've got no problem pulling a 6-year-old
Right.
into a book because I've got a 6-year-old I can use as a model.
Have you had characters that grow up with you though? Like when she said that character had been with her for 14 years or something like that?
I've only done one book where the character actually aged. She has a broken thing where her heart should be. I think he starts off at the beginning of the book he's 8 years old and he ends it in his 40s. And that was tricky to do, and that's probably why the book is 200 some thousand words. It's a big book. Most of my stories tend to take place over a couple hours or a couple of days. I tend to default to, like Jenna said, to the younger age brackets, like late 20s, early 30s, mainly because there's a ton of action in my books. And like I'm 53, if I did some of the stuff that my characters do in their books, I would be in the hospital within an hour. Like they need to be a little bit more nimble than I am at 53, so I have to go back a couple of years. But I think that tends to be a sweet spot. And the funny thing is, I know, like for me personally, like my readers are women 45 and over. Like that's my main demographic. So it makes me wonder if I should be writing more towards that, or if just that's the norm. Like people just like reading about kids and people are in their 20s and 30s.
I think it kind of depends on, like Kevin had said, he's perpetually 35. Like I do think that there is a tendency for people to sort of see themselves like in a certain age. Like aging is kind of weird like that. Like I don't know that we necessarily are aware that like, oh, well, now I'm in my 40s. Like you just kind of like have an age that you're sort of like comfortable with. So I think readers, when they read like different protagonists, like they can kind of see themselves. So maybe they like seeing themselves as, the nice, nimble 30-year-old instead of the not so nimble 45-year-old. I don't know.
Have any of you guys ever written a courtroom drama? Something that takes place in the courtroom?
I've included some courtroom drama and things, but I wouldn't say I mean,
yeah,
it was like scenes, not chapters. So I'm too scared to do that right now. I don't feel like I as much time as I've spent in courts, and I mean from the good guy's side, not as a defendant. I still don't feel entirely confident that I could pull off like what it really means to be in a courtroom in a really dramatic case. So I haven't attempted it yet.
Yeah, it's tricky. And, I've done a little bit, nothing that I've published, but I mean, being married to an attorney helps. So I just ask lots of questions. What would happen here? So I have a little more confidence that way, but it's still daunting and it's difficult to make it interesting, with the way things really are. It's to get that balance between what's realistic and what's interesting is tough.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Maggie also, I thought it was interesting, talked about like using sarcasm and satire to protect yourself as an author when you're writing. And I've been thinking about that. I thought that was really interesting. And I was like, do I use sarcasm as a
Christine, I did not come here to be attacked today. Yeah, when she said that, I was just like, eek! I see myself in that picture and I don't know if I like it.
Was this book written in first person? I haven't read this one yet.
I haven't read it yet either, so I'm not sure.
I was just curious. A lot of times it's a lot easier to use that when you're writing in first person.
Yeah, I like first person for that. I tend to write very snarky, sarcastic characters for no reason personally that I can dig into and see.
I have like 5 books maybe that are written in first person. I have an entire trilogy that I wrote in first person, and the thing I've noticed is that the the main character is not the one with all the great lines. It's like his grandfather is like the snarky one. And so I was able to somehow by writing in first person, I was able to write dialogue for someone else that really was kind of like on point. You know, I don't know what it was about that experience, and I'll do that for my characters in third person writing too. But it sometimes it just feels forced. But it's kind of like if you're overhearing someone else say it, you know, they're the cut up. It seems more realistic.
But I get using that as protection in first person because you get so close to that person, you almost might need it as a little bit of a wall, or because you're way more into that character than you are in third person. You're on the stage instead of sitting in the front row watching the play, right? So I see that.
Well, and it's also, you know, I mean, writing is hard in the sense that you do have to sort of open yourself up to a certain vulnerability, which can be very uncomfortable for someone who doesn't particularly enjoy a lot of emotions. So I think that I did try that. Like my earlier work probably did tend towards more of that surface sarcasm, and I've really had to work to sort of undo that and like let my characters explore deeper emotions. And I think when you do that, like, I think maybe that's why it worked for your side character, Kevin, because, you know, that's sort of like you can still have it and tap into it. But if you're like really kind of hitting those deep emotional beats with your main character, it doesn't, I don't know that it's necessarily as easy to kind of hit those like snarkier things, if that makes any sense.
I thought it was interesting when Maggie was talking about themes, that she tends to do the same ones, that she's obsessed with the same thing. I think she said alienation and secrets and unexpected attraction. Do you find that you are obsessed with the same themes, or do they change?
No, I think mine all tend to be pretty much abandonment and betrayal in different forms, but I've noticed that comes up a lot.
I tend to grab onto one particular theme, and sometimes it'll cross over from more than one book. You know, and then I find a new theme and sort of move on to it. I've actually staggered or moved releases around on books before just to make sure that they weren't too similar. You know, because I'd written one book right after the other, and like they kind of use the same theme. So I'll write something else and slap it in between the two of them when they come out, just to break that up a little bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I tend to grab onto one, which is usually control and disconnection from other people. But then I do occasional books where I'm like, well, that theme surprises me. I didn't know that was going to be about that, which is also fun.
I think a lot of mine are mostly focused on like that guy who is right and he knows he's right, but everyone else thinks he's wrong. No, wait, that's my life. Okay, never mind. Yeah, sorry.
Very confusing, you know.
It is. Well, before we wrap up, I want to know how many of you have used a litter box, because I have. You guys haven't used a litter box?
I have never used a litter box.
I have not.
No, I was explaining before the show that if you're a van lifer, the idea of that isn't such a weird idea because they use cat litter in composting toilets a lot. So that's a thing. But since it came up in the show, so litter box kid.
So if you're on the highway and there's a van next to you, you don't know what's actually going on inside there.
Now you know.
Don't flip me off. That's the rule.
Okay. So JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Cynthia Palaio on. She's a Bram Stoker award-winning author who's been nominated numerous times for the International Latino Book Award. She's going to be here to tell us about her latest novel, Forgotten Sisters, which releases March 19th.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.